career seminar. So first, go ahead and grab some food, and we also have a sign sheet, and please sign your name and leave your message here. So we can contact you later for any activities we are holding. And otherwise, I'm going to introduce our speaker. So it's a great honor that we have Mr. Brian Kirstein here to share his perspective on corporate job versus consulting career. Brian got his bachelor's degree in ChemE here at UM and his MBA from Booth School of Business at the University of Chicago. He started his career as a project manager in PwC, and then went to work coverage to serve as a VP of the Global Product Development. In 2006, he founded his own consulting firm, which is called the Innova Group. The clients of his company are from all sectors of the industry, such as like a chemical company like Dow Chemicals, and automotive company like Nissan and Ford, pharmaceutical company like Pfizer, and many other big companies you probably heard of every day. Right now, Brian also serves on the board of director in the Unison HQ. As you can see, Brian has a very successful career in both coverage and consulting companies. And he's also a very successful entrepreneur. So with that, let's welcome Brian Kirstein.
Thank you. Is this working? Is it working? Yeah, good. Is there a clicker? Do you know, or should I just, doesn't matter, I can. Okay. So what I thought I'd do is give you a little more background. Thanks for that sketch, but I've got one slide that just kind of runs through the background, and then I got a couple slides on Innova, so you know what I've been doing for the last 12 years to give you some context. And then I have one slide that I want to use just to tee up this conversation about corporates versus consulting, and actually I've added startups to the mix. So it's corporate versus startups versus consulting. And just kind of facilitate a conversation around what I've seen in each of these parts of my career and how you might think about it going forward. You got big decisions to make. Maybe give you the perspective of at least one person on what those different career stops felt like and why I made the changes and that sort of thing. That sound all right? Good. A little bit of exercise before I get started. You're going to hear who I am. Just shout out what departments or schools you're a part of. Anybody start? Public health, engineer, physics. Didn't hear that? Chemistry. Anything else?
Political science.
Okay, good. Great. Okay. So that's a graphic of the career path, and so I made this a few years ago for another purpose and just updated it. The point of this is to kind of say, you guys know the term random walk from statistics? My career is kind of a random walk, where I made a series of pivots based on what made sense at the time, with no grand vision of an end game. There are people your age who know exactly what they want to do. They head down that path and they do it for 40 years, and it's very successful. If you can do that, congratulations. If you can do that in something you love, I applaud that. That didn't work for me. Every 5 years or so, I found something else seemed to make sense at the time, so I just changed. And maybe I just have a low attention span. I don't know. But you can see this flipping from academia first. Then I did some corporate stuff for 8 years. back to academia, late to business school. I was ancient when I went to business school at the age of 30. And then my first full-time gig in consulting, this was general management consulting for a company called Booz Allen Hamilton, which has been swallowed up by PwC. And by the way, this was two smaller companies too that then later got swallowed up by BASF and Honeywell. So, and then I got kind of tired of consulting and travel and all that. Had two young kids at home. It wasn't working to go to the airport at 7 in the morning on Monday and get home at 5 p.m. on Friday after 5 years. So I said, okay, I've got to stop that. So I got a corporate job across the lake from Chicago in Michigan with Whirlpool Corporation, and had 3 different major roles there. And in the last role, I discovered or rediscovered innovation. And so Whirlpool was undergoing a company-wide, CEO-driven innovation transformation of the organization. And I was right in the middle of that as a VP of Global Product Development. And so I had a chance to live that for 5 years. And then they were starting to kind of shift their emphasis. I'm in my late 40s, and I thought I've got one more pivot left in me. So I jumped off a cliff and started a consulting business. And then a year later, I met a couple guys in Ann Arbor trying to do the same thing. We got together doing some pro bono work for an association and started doing projects together. And in 2009, we formed the Innovo Group. So that's how that came together. So 9 years later, we're still going. We're a boutique. We're about 10 people, but we do really, really fun stuff. So we're downtown. We're on Ashley Street, so 1 block west of Main Street, right across from the Garden Store. We're on the 3rd floor of the Schwaben building. And we really do kind of 3 kinds of things. We do future vision, we do opportunity creation, we do innovation system design build. So our clients are companies like pretty much across industry, but Honeywell, Dow Chemical, ExxonMobil, Nestle Purina on the consumer side, Lubrizol in Cleveland. United Health Group is a big health insurer up in Minneapolis. HCSC, which is a Blue Cross Blue Shield conglomerate in Chicago, is a current client. We've done automotive work with Johnson Controls and Nissan and Ford. So a little bit of ag and food work with Cargill, which if anybody knows, Cargill is the largest privately held company in the world, $150 billion grain and food company. So that's the kind of client we work with. So we help them think about the future, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. What could the world look like? We help them actually create specific opportunities, so big, new growth opportunities. Sometimes technology forward. We have a technology, what can we do with it? Sometimes it's we have a market need we've identified. We'd like to find technologies that can create a solution to solve that need. And then sometimes they just come and say, look, we just want to grow. And we don't really have a technology in mind or a market focus in mind. We just want to grow. So help us find opportunities to grow. And then sometimes they say, we really want to just get good at innovation. So can you help us design and build an innovation system for the company? System not in meaning just IT, but information technology like software, but system writ large. Business process and organization and all that stuff. So we work across industries because it's possible to find a technology and understand it in one environment and application, and the ability to then see the possibilities in another environment and application or industry can create value. So anyway, that's what we do. Been doing it for a dozen years. I shared with you the kinds of companies, mentioned a lot of these. So the three kinds of things we do, broken down a little bit. So in the upper left, we do future vision. So it's a combination of creating an innovation strategy or how to win, domaining, looking for fun places to play, interesting places to play, and then futuring kind of what's next 5, 10, 15, 20 years out. Opportunity creation is finding opportunities, so we call that discovery, and then incubating those opportunities. So you've got an idea, you're pretty sure it's a winner, help us move it down the path toward the market. And then portfolio is I got a bunch of ideas. I don't want new ideas, but I just need help sorting out which ones are the best ideas. So we do that too. Making sense so far? Am I losing you? You good? And then this is the innovation system design build. What are the kind of people we should be hiring to do innovation effectively? What should our organization look like, and help us with process and that sort of thing. So, yeah.
You incubate outside ventures also or inside only? Like inside
it's a good question. So the question was, do you incubate just inside the four walls of the company or also outside ventures? And what we do is help companies incubate inside opportunities, inside the four walls, and find opportunities to incubate within external ventures. But we don't get involved in the ventures ourselves. So we don't invest, we don't run startups, but we identify startups that they could work with to develop their idea. Does that make sense? Okay. So this is the money slide. So I just threw this together this morning. It's probably not complete. It's meant to be notional and start the conversation. But these are some of the things I've experienced in my career about, things that work, things that are good and things that are not so good about each of these career paths. So if I start out with corporate, I'd say, with 8 years the first time around and then 11 years the second, 19 years in corporate, I'd say my experience is that it's the one place of the three where if you want to have lifestyle, you can. You can choose that inside a company and be secure, probably as long as you keep your head down and you do a nice job. You can probably have a nice family life and hobbies and that sort of thing. If you want to throw it all in for the company and try to move up the ladder quickly, then you might sacrifice some lifestyle. But at least you have the choice in corporations, kind of which way you want to play that balance. I think it's the only place really where you can get really good management and leadership experience. So my daughter graduated from here in 2011 from Industrial and Operations Engineering, and she went to work for Lockheed Martin in Texas. Now she's in Japan, and she's about to go to Italy, 2 years in Japan and probably another 2 years in Italy. And so what she's experiencing is what it's like to live in a corporation. Most of her friends went to work for consulting firms. I mean, that's, kids with bachelor's and master's in I&OE, it's a very, very popular thing to do. So her going into corporate felt like an exception compared to what I saw a lot of her friends doing. But what she's learning is, even if you decide to go consulting, or even the startup world, the big companies still matter because you're probably going to consult for big companies. If you're a startup, you may get funded by big companies. You may collaborate with big companies. Knowing how big companies work is not a bad thing. And there's a certain way big companies work, and figuring that out and what different functions do and how they relate, how management works, and all that is time well spent. So she's figuring that out, right away. Generally, if you want to add a little edge to your career, you can get cross-functional experience. You can bang on the table and say, I've been in this function too long, I want to try something else. And if you scream loud enough, then they'll make you happy. If you're doing good work, they'll want to keep you happy and give you those opportunities. And it's hands-on. You're going to see results, right? You're going to work on stuff that gets implemented, and you get that satisfaction of seeing real world change, which is nice. Some not so good things. They're bureaucratic. It's just the nature of the beast. Some more than others. So I would say, for example, if it's a company that's in a mature and stable industry, let's take Big Food, for example, Kellogg's or General Mills, basically growing with GNP. Right? What happens in these organizations is a certain sort of rigor mortis sets in. And it's very hard when the organization is not growing. It's hard for people to move up. And so the only way someone moves up generally is someone else has to move out or retire. And there's more pressure from below than there is exiting at the top. And so it just kind of slows everything down from a career advancement standpoint. It sort of impacts the culture a little bit. And I compare that to what it must feel like today at Amazon, where they are growing so fast that you hire in one day and you're a newbie, and then 2 years later you're a manager, and then a lower middle manager, then a middle manager, then a senior middle manager, then a director in 8 years. Completely changes the dynamic, and you may not feel so much like that in an organization like Amazon. You're not really in control of your own destiny. We tend to think of the corporate life as being more stable, more reliable, more secure. That maybe was more true 30 years ago. It's not so true anymore. So, you're going to have bosses, and you're going to have good bosses and bad bosses. And if you got a bad boss and you don't get along, then, it may not feel very secure. And so, maybe you guys are hearing this, I don't know. But when I left University of Michigan many, many years ago, the thing you did was most of us went to work for large companies, and we expected to spend our careers there. I think it's less true today. And a little bit, I would say, it feels to me like if you go to work for a large company, and if it's in a kind of a monolithic industry, the longer you spend there, my sense is the more vulnerable you are, because you're learning a certain industry, and if that industry gets disrupted or stagnates, the older you get, the harder it is to move. And so I think there's this risk of being in a unitary, monolithic environment for too long. But again, it's a lifestyle thing, so you have to factor that into. Does it make sense? Any questions about corporate before I move on? Any surprises there? Yeah? Make sense? Okay. So consulting. So my first spin in consulting was with a large strategy consulting firm in Chicago. At the time it was called Booz Allen Hamilton, and then Booz and Company, and then Strategy, and now it's a part of PwC. So that lasted 5 years, and then the second spin is the one I'm in right now, which is now 12 years in my own firm. So I would say this. Generally, compensation is better. I think most of my daughter's friends in 2011 probably got higher out-of-the-box compensation than my daughter did, working for Accenture and places like that. So I think pays up, which is good, I guess. Strategic thinking, generally, a pretty nice exposure to thinking at a higher level about how businesses work than you would if you went in at the bottom level like my daughter did into a corporation. So Sophie goes in as a frontline employee at Lockheed Martin. One of her friends goes to work for Accenture, and the first project she gets at Accenture is Lockheed Martin, and they're trying to analyze whether or not Lockheed Martin should get into subsea discovery. That's pretty cool. And so they're, she's going to get, her friend's going to get an exposure to some pretty strategic kinds of decisions and analytics years ahead of where Sophie will. Well, Sophie's churning away in the bottom tier of the organization, figuring out how these complex systems actually work. At some point, those two experiences come back together, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay. So cross-functional, if you're working for a good consulting firm and they move you around, you're going to get exposed to operations one day, maybe some sales and marketing, functional the next day, maybe some product development. So you get to see as a consultant how all these different functions work from the outside. And that's just about as good, actually. And then the nice thing is you add in the cross-industry, so you get to see a lot of different, if you're not sure what you want to do, you want to try some industries. That's what I did after my MBA was, after 8 years of downstream petroleum processing, for me it was about how do I get that behind me and how do I level the playing field so that my next corporate decision, I've got a broader playing field. The answer is get an MBA and go work for a consulting firm, where I was exposed to a broad range of industries. So 5 years later, I'm 37, and now I can pretty much go anywhere from an industry standpoint because I'd had that 5 years in consulting. So that's really good. So mindset. The problem with consulting, yeah?
Yeah, I was curious if people who go into consulting, they actually develop a wider set of skills that might lead to a wider set of opportunities as opposed to corporate where you probably stay in one industry, or is my understanding wrong?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but let me try. So quite often, smart students like you will get into rotational programs in the corporate ladder. That's what my daughter did. So she actually had 4 experiences in 2 years. So she got some of that rapid cross-functional experience. So, and as I said, you can also force that yourself, even if you're not in a rotational program. Not quite as quickly, but you can. The cross-industry, depending on the company, you can probably get something that feels like cross-industry if you go to work for like a GE. But my sense, even in those big companies like GE, it's a lot harder to move across those business unit boundaries than it is cross-functional. So it's a little harder. I think within a consulting firm, it's natural. You're gonna bounce around different industries, and at some point, though, even in consulting, if you stay long enough, that's going to change too. So if you're there for 5 years, 5, 6, 7 years, you're going to keep getting that exposure. At some point, they're going to say, if you're serious about becoming a partner, you got to pick a vertical. And so at that point, you got to narrow. Is that? Yeah? All right. So this mindset thing is quite often I'll see somebody that's been in consulting for 20 years. They've been a partner for 10 years. They're a senior partner. They've made gobs of money. And they could retire, but they think, you know what, I've never done this corporate thing. And some company hires them to go run a business inside a corporation. If I could bet on those situations, I would bet against that person 99% of the time. Because they have no experience in how to manage and lead a large organization. What they bring to it is this mindset from consulting, which is, it's all about the right answer. If I could just figure out the right answer, man, we got this thing licked. And because that's what you do in consulting. That's the value you're providing. It's not, frankly, how it works in companies. It's a part of the puzzle. But it's how do I get a lot of people to believe in this, that this is the right thing? And that leadership and management capability, if you haven't lived it, if you haven't lived 20 years understanding how difficult that is, you don't have a chance. So I see these people take these jobs and they don't last long. So that's something to think about. If career flexibility is something that you aspire to, I guess is what I aspire to by intention or by accident, think about that sort of thing. You know, it's keeping your skill sets blended and mixed, and try some different things. You've heard about the others, I think. The travel, it's what got me in the end after 5 years. It was just too much. It's less today, actually. I think a lot of these consulting firms have actually kind of grown a heart, and they understand that they just can't drive the consultants into the ground with 5-day-a-week travel and disrupt family lives and your ability to date and that sort of thing. And so I think now it's like 3 or 4 days a week. It's kind of the rule now. So it's a little more manageable. Hours and stress, I hear it's down a little, but down from 70, 80 to 60, 70 maybe is my sense of it. Turnover is really, when I went through it the first time, the average lifespan was 2 years, I think. And so the churn was really high. And so it wasn't just that the churn might get you, but that all these people you were getting to know, it was a revolving door. And so it felt very unstable. Like people were always coming and going, and you never felt like there was a home growing, that, in a team and so there's that churn and turnover that can be a little disruptive. And then this thing might get you. Yeah, question.
Yeah, so I've heard a lot about the turnover. May I know why is that though?
Why is it like that? Because I think this gets a lot of people. So a lot of it's voluntary. So the stress and the travel gets a lot of people. And then the consulting firms are, they're looking for the people that are going to become principals and partners. And if they see after a couple of years that you're not on a track to be able to do that, then they are more than likely to say, I'd rather take a bet on an incoming graduate from university and get them moving up the track. So that causes some of the spin out too, involuntary. Does that make sense? I think these two, though, are the bigger issue for consulting firms. And that's why I think they've actually, over the last 10 or 20 years, they've made a real concerted effort to try to solve that, because it's not that great for them. I think they would rather this was less and the turnover was less. And then this not hands-on thing, I think, is something that might also ultimately, if you go down the consulting path, might get you. Because after doing a whole bunch of analysis and handing off recommendations and advice to companies, the sort of feeling starts to creep in like, boy, I would just like to see that actually implemented one time. And so it sort of was in my head too when I jumped out and went to Whirlpool, was saying, I'm done with that. I want to try my hands on and actually try to make some of this, bring this to real world. Does that make sense for consulting? Any surprises? Any objections? Anybody got experience that differs from that? That fits your kind of expectation? What's that? No what? Yeah. Yeah.
Would you say that it's easier to transition if you enter from consulting than go to corporate, or the other way around? That as graduate.
I think the standard answer, and I'm trying to think, is this the right answer still? But I think the standard answer is consulting first, then corporate. And I think that's probably still true. Anybody heard differently? Yeah, I think that's probably still true. Yeah. Yeah.
So from what I heard, that the exit opportunities from consulting firms seems to be like 2 years, and then you landed on a much better corporate job that you can get.
Right.
From, staying
Yes.
2 days
Yes.
corporate.
Yes. I think that's probably still true. Now, there is a thing that I also know a lot of business schools, like the one I went to, they really want you to have at least 2 and maybe 4 years of corporate experience before graduate school. And then you can do the consulting thing after graduate school, right? So you can still. Yeah.
You said the mindset is always about the right answer, but we always hear things like it's not about the right answer, it's not about landing on the right answer, it's about the approach. And I mean, even when you go to clients, about how you approach their problems, and
I'm not sure I understood. Try it again.
Is it always, you said it's always about the right answer, but
Yeah.
you always hear stories about the approach you take to the problem, things like that.
For consultants. So what I said was for consultants, it's about the right answer. Right?
No, I meant about consulting itself.
Yes.
Is it only about the right answer and not about like the way you approach it?
I would say this, I guess. Consulting firms today actually go well beyond giving advice. And so like the big ones like Accenture, they've got huge IT departments, right, that actually build software and systems. And so from that standpoint, you're sort of getting beyond the it's the right answer to more of an implementation experience. But I can't think of another way to answer your question. It seems to be that it's still mostly about the right answer. It's an analytical outcome. Yeah. Which is good as far as it goes. It's important. And the ability of consultants to get to the right analytical answer it's pretty important. And a lot of companies hire consultants because they really can't. You know, the questions are so thorny. The modeling required is too challenging for internal people, and so the system, this ecosystem works. The consulting corporate ecosystem works. Both bring an important part of the puzzle. Yeah.
I'm curious about the hours specifically. Does it get better as you move up in the company? So if you're there 5 years, are you still doing this 70 hours?
Corporate or consulting?
For consulting.
I don't think the hours get better. I think the travel gets better. And I would say the predictability of the hours also gets better. So as a partner, or a principal and then a partner, you control when the work gets done. That's a huge advantage. So I can work this around my schedule. As an associate, you got no power. And so you find out at 5 o'clock, you've got opera tickets at 8. At 5 o'clock, you find out you're going to be there all night. That's just what it is. You learn to give away tickets. And so it does get better as you move up. But I don't think the hours get better. Still pretty hard. And by the way, the same is true in corporate. We're always, it's funny because we're always striving in our careers to get to a place where things get easier. And in reality, it never does. But it does I think it gets less stressful.
So I think the stuff you've listed under consulting seems commensurate with what I've heard from other places about like the large firms, which are kind of likely what most of the people who come out with a PhD or MD are going to get sucked into.
Yep.
An Accenture or McKinsey or something
Yep.
like that. But it isn't. There's sort of like a broad spectrum of different types of consulting.
Yes.
Technical consultants. So what are your thoughts on sort of how these vary as a function of like, so if you were hiring a consultant in a company your size,
Yes.
how are these things going to sort of differ?
No, it's a really good, I'm glad you mentioned it because it is important to say first that the consulting is a very diverse industry with all kinds of different, so I've been really talking about the main big houses that hire a lot of students. I think in general I would say that lifestyle in general gets better when you get into the smaller, more niche-y kinds of consulting firms. I don't know why that is, but I think that's true. It's certainly true in our firm. We're paying attention to lifestyle pretty carefully. Yeah. So it's good. If you want to put the time in, and in managing a career, instead of taking the 3 interviews that are handed to you on campus with Accenture and McKinsey and BCG, and you want to put the time in, you can find those consulting firms that are probably more like that. But that means going out to find them, right? And not them coming here. Is that fair? Okay. Startup. So this arguably is my weakest topic because I've not done the true, Silicon Valley style startup. We cross paths with them in the work we do. We interact with them, but I see that kind of startup from a distance, like the tech startup. But my experience, I would call, is more entrepreneurial. So starting up a consulting business and growing it is not the same as like a true startup. But I'll tell you what I think anyway. So I think, from my own experience and from what I see, the camaraderie is high, right? It's a smaller team and with a big goal, a single goal, and you're all in there together. You're changing hats, and everybody's in it, shared mission, and so I think you got that upside of that teaming camaraderie. Obviously, one of the reasons you're going to deal with this is that there's a financial upside, and sometimes very big, low likelihood, but very big financial upside. I think there's the legacy. I think even in corporations, even though it's hands-on, I don't know that you're ever left with a sense of legacy. In some cases, I'm sure that's true. People have left great legacies at corporations. I think for most people, it's a little bit hard to do. You can have a hands-on experience. You can create real things and feel good about it. But something you can look at, 20 years later and say is a legacy. But if you're in a startup, you're creating this thing that lives on. It feels to me like the potential for a more compelling sense of accomplishment and legacy than the other two options. Certainly in consulting, again, maybe that should be pointed out as a downside here is your legacy is, if you're going to start a consulting firm, then that could be your legacy. But mostly you're just maintaining the consulting firm's brand, and it's tough to walk away from a consulting experience feeling like, I did that. You control your destiny, and you really do feel that. Even though failure is likely in tech, particularly in tech startups, rule of thumb is 90% fail. While it's underway and operating, you feel like you're in control of your destiny, and that's kind of what's exciting about it. Like this thing is going to succeed or fail based on kind of what I do and how I help, and so it's good. And then again, I think in most startups, you've got the chance of having a cross-functional experience, small team. Even if you're not asked to do promotion stuff or maybe firm operating stuff, you get to see it. You're a part of those decisions and discussions, and so you kind of feel the sense of the entire enterprise inside the startup. Hours stress on the downside. Probably the big one is that one. So the financial downside goes along with it. So lots of startups are going to ask you to invest, your sweat equity, and so in a lot of cases you're going to be making less here by the hour, by the week, by the month than here or here. I think it'd be rare to find a startup that's willing to pay you more than what you'd earn from a consulting firm or even a corporation. So there's sweat equity there. And so when the startup fails, you literally have just seen a lot of sweat equity go to zero. And that's got some frustration. But I'm not sure that's as much as just the sense of failure that happens when that happens. But maybe the key thing is, like what corporations say now is treat it as a learning experience. Don't feel failure. Treat it as a learning experience. And then maybe you can diminish a little bit of that sense of failure. Others in the room, startup experience? Anybody? Yeah? A couple years? Yeah?
3.5.
Yeah? Okay. What would you say about it?
That.
Yeah? Yeah?
It was, couple months of unemployment in the middle.
In the middle, yeah.
It's not bad actually.
A breather. A breather. Halftime. Hardware, okay.
Yeah, renewable energy.
Oh, nice, okay.
So,
In town here?
Oregon.
Oregon, okay. Okay, good. Successful?
No, just this. I left a few years ago, and I just heard they just failed last
Okay.
month.
Okay, yeah, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's what it is. But that's experience. Next time you know more, smarter.
I'd do it again.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I remember working in, when I was in the corporate side, we'd run across veterans of startups who had just, they'd spent 5 years or 10 years, just heads down, going for it all. And when it ended, they just couldn't do it anymore, at least for a while. So they went and got a corporate job, and then, who knows, a couple of years later, but they were seeking refuge inside a corporation to kind of wind down a little. Yep.
So I have a question. It's on consulting, sorry for taking you back, but I guess the reason why a lot of PhDs go to big consulting firms is because they get to try their hands on so many things, especially when you want to get to specialized. But if you go to the niche consulting firms, don't you think that actually undercuts it in some way? Because you probably would just be focusing on some technology in some area.
Do I think it's more what? I missed that.
I was saying, don't you think that going to the niche consulting
Yeah.
firms will undercut that? Because you're trying to try hands in several things, and then if you go to the niche consulting firms, you probably just focus on some area.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably true. Yep. Yeah. Yep. Yep. What else? Yep.
Little question here. So these are sort of all from kind of the employee's perspective. Right? So these are what we're going to enjoy or not enjoy
Yes.
about being part of these things. I almost feel like during my search for this, and with your PhD now, so I'm looking, I don't have a strong sense of what I want or what I will want, but I'm really interested in sort of matching the opportunity with what my skill set is. So do you think that there are some skills or traits that map into these different areas particularly well, and looking from like the other side back toward us?
It's a really good question. So let me think about it. There is one answer to that in here, right? That I think you need to be honest with yourself about the lifestyle that you like to have and want to have. I don't judge anybody. It's very, to say that I really want to keep my career down to 40 hours a week, but I want to devote myself to something a lot more interesting and fun and fulfilling outside is wonderful. You just have to decide, because I think that mindset's not going to work here, right? So that's maybe one answer to the question is, how really do I want to live? So what else? I would say, again, there's so much that depends with this. If you want to move up in a company, if you want to manage and move up the ladder, then I would imagine you got to like being around people. So you have social skills. So you have to enjoy socializing. You're going to be in large groups of people frequently, and remembering people's names is important. And being personable and wanting to get to know people and that kind of outward, I think that's a pretty important skill. And, do you have it or do you want to develop it, right, is a fair question. I think if you like the heads down, analytical, modeling, data, clearly that's a signal there. Do you have anything in your mind? Like what do you think?
So I guess the most basic binary is like, are you a really technical person? Do you want to work on technical problems, or are you more interested in communicating and
Yes.
Where do those two things fit
Yeah.
on this?
Well, that's what's a little difficult because you can do them both here, right? You really can. And you can do them both here, actually, because and I went the general management consulting route, but I know even McKinsey hires PhDs to do pretty narrow technical work. So I would think you could do that with McKinsey or with Accenture. So those options exist maybe in all three of these. Even in a startup, right? If you're the heads down technical guy, they want that too, right? And so, maybe all three of those both of those are accessible in all three spaces. But if I was heads down, more technical in nature, I guess this one seems to me to be the most likely to offer big upside. I mean, and we've seen it, right? We've seen the introverts do very, very well in the startup world. I don't know.
That's a good answer. As good an answer as there is. So.
Yeah. That's a good question. I hadn't thought much
Can I
about
ask you, for example, if you were to start recruiting consultants,
Yes.
what quality of him would you or her would you value the most?
So we're a little bit of an odd duck, right? Because we're an innovation consulting firm. So, what we look for is called the ambidextrous mind. So it's the ability to see the trees and the forest. And so, we need people that are going to, see the problem at hand, but be broad enough to think laterally and see opportunities that aren't obvious. Because we're working with clients, we need social skills. So you're going to find yourself in front of a room full of middle, even senior executives at a client having to facilitate an 8-hour meeting. You've got to have the social skill side of it. I think those are probably and then, so I think what sets us apart a little bit is this innovation thing. So we're looking for that creative evidence of the creative mind, I guess, is what I would say. That I'd say other consulting firms aren't necessarily looking for. The way I compare what we do to we do compete at some level with some of the big houses, and so what I tell prospective clients is that if you hire McKinsey or BCG, you're going to get a top-down analytical solution to the problem. If you hire Nova, you're going to get a bottoms-up creative solution to the problem. And so we go wide and we gather qualitative to find the surprising, the needle in the haystack. And our processes are very human-oriented. They're very much about human behavioral considerations, how people think and act. And so our processes are very human-centric, very collaborative-oriented with the client. We have to do this together. And traditional consulting is more about, again, analysis, getting bright, young, smart people to do analysis that the client can't do and present them with analytical answers that they asked for and might not have seen or been able to do. Does that make sense? It's really a really different way of coming at the problem. So if I was asking the question, I have a growing gas sensor market in the U.S. But I can see that it's going to probably hit maturity in the US in about 3 years. Where should I go next? That's a classic consulting analytical problem. I can tell you which markets around the world today would be the best, most likely to adopt, biggest markets, deepest problems. If the question is, I have this technology inside the sensor, what else could it do? That's us. Or, I think measuring cyanide at the level of 3 parts per billion is a huge market need. What technologies might I consider? That's us. What else? Ooh, it's 7 o'clock. You guys good?
How long does it take to go from an associate to a consultant to a partner? Is it depending on the firm or?
Depends on firm, but I think more on circumstance. So I think the average is 8 to 10 years. Used to be, and I suspect that's still true. But circumstances, personal competence would be a big part of it, but also circumstances in the firm might accelerate that path by up to a couple of years. At my first consulting gig, my whole class of consultants lucked out because there was a growth spurt, and we all got promoted to senior associate in 12 months. And I'd like to think it was because we were really fantastic consultants, but the fact that everybody got promoted kind of was like, all right. I think it's less about individual and more about the situation. But I think 8 to 10 is a fair assumption to go into it with. So that's a long time to work 60, 78 hours a week and travel 3-4 days a week. You got to really, people that get there are durable.
Does it happen in large consulting
I think it's about the same. Yep. That's my sense. Yep. The other thing that you have to be able to do, the other thing that happens in large consulting firms that you have to be able to learn how to do is sell. So sometime between year 3 and year 8, you got to figure out how to sell business, because that's all partners do. Right? They spend 20% of their time on projects and 80% of the time selling. And so you have to enjoy that, and you have to be good at it. And I think a lot of people that flame out at 5 or 6 years, probably because they can't figure that out or don't want to figure it out. Anything else? Yeah?
Okay, so let's thanks Brian again.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank all of you. Thanks for coming.